Today, we're going to do something a little different. We're basically stepping into the role of a celestial HR department to look at a really fascinating leadership question.
Okay, let's just jump right in with a pretty bold question, shall we? Do you think you could pick a better leadership team than, well, God? I know it sounds a little out there, but it's actually a fantastic way to think about how we choose leaders.
So here's the core idea that's going to frame this whole explainer. We all say we want leaders who are honest, who care, who do the right thing. But the historical record, it shows that even with divine insight, finding people who perfectly fit that description is, well, it's complicated.
So let's put on our hiring manager hats. We're about to pull some of the most famous leadership files in history and see what we can really learn from them.
First up, let's check out the all-star resumes. You know, the candidates who look absolutely perfect on paper. And our first file belongs to a guy named Moses. His job title? Rescuer of an entire nation. Yeah, not exactly what you'd call an entry-level gig. Look, on the left you see the highlight reel, right? Parting a sea, receiving the 10 Commandments. I mean, that's a legendary resume. But then you look at the performance review on the right, and it tells a totally different story. This incredibly powerful leader, he also had a history of serious anger issues and some pretty critical failures under pressure that, in the end, cost him everything. And this just nails the key lesson from Moses' story. Just because someone is called to do something great, it doesn't mean they're flawless. And being able to perform miracles, that has absolutely nothing to do with emotional maturity. The point is, even the most anointed leaders have some deep, deep flaws. All right, let's pull up our next candidate and see how this pattern develops. Meet Saul. Now, on the surface, this guy looked like the perfect choice for a king. I mean, he literally stood head and shoulders above everyone else. But again, look at the reality. He had the look, he had the title, but in practice, the man panicked under pressure. He only kind of followed direct orders, and when things got really stressful, he totally abandoned the principles he was supposed to live by. Turns out being tall isn't a leadership skill. And the lesson from Saul is so sharp and so important for anyone who's ever had to hire someone. Charisma is not the same thing as character. Someone can look the part, they can say all the right things, but that tells you zip about their integrity when the pressure's on. And that brings us to David. Now, this is maybe the most complex resume of them all. He's called a man after God's own heart. He's a warrior, a poet, basically a national hero. And yet, his file contains some of the most shocking moral failures you can imagine. We're talking a horrifying abuse of power, arranging a murder to cover it all up, and some profound acts of pride. His devotion was real, for sure, but that did not make him immune to temptation and just terrible, terrible decisions. So what's the big difference between Saul and David? I mean, they both failed spectacularly. Well, this is where it gets interesting. When confronted, Saul just made excuses. David? He repented. Saul's sin came from a place of fear and insecurity. David's came from pride and desire. And the result? Saul lost everything. David, because he confessed and took responsibility, received mercy. The crucial thing to see here is that it wasn't the failure that defined them, it was their response to it. And this wasn't just some one-off thing. No, the performance reviews show a very clear pattern starting to emerge. Let's just quickly flip through a few more of these files. You've got Rehoboam, who completely ignored wise advice and ended up splitting the whole kingdom. Then there's Uzziah, whose pride made him cross boundaries he shouldn't have. Even Hezekiah, one of the best kings, had this late-game wobble with pride that had major consequences. You just can't deny it. The pattern of flawed leadership is everywhere. All of this kind of forces us to ask a pretty tough question about the person doing the hiring. Was this just a string of bad hires? Let's just be direct about it. If the hiring standard is to only pick people who will never fail, who will never ever misuse their power, then honestly, based on the evidence we've seen, the selector's track record looks pretty bad. But here it is. Here's the punchline, the thing that reframes this whole problem. The issue isn't a bad selection process. The issue is the applicant pool. The pattern is simply that power, pressure, and pride have a way of revealing the inherent flaws in all of us.
And you know what's really fascinating? This ancient wisdom lines up perfectly with what modern leadership research tells us today.
Seriously, modern leadership research confirms everything we've just looked at. Studies show that power amplifies a person's existing flaws, just like with David. Success often breeds overconfidence, like we saw with Uzziah. And intense pressure doesn't build character, it reveals it.
That was the key difference between Saul and David. So ultimately, the two things that predict long-term success in leadership are strong accountability and genuine humility. These aren't new ideas, they're ancient patterns of human nature.
So this brings us to the ultimate takeaway. Maybe the point of picking leaders isn't to find flawless candidates, because, spoiler alert, they don't exist. Maybe the real goal is to find people who are willing to be formed, who can actually learn from their failures, and who are able to grow in humility.
And before we get too high and mighty about our own judgment, let's turn the question back on ourselves. Looking at these resumes, would we have been any smarter? Would we have spotted the anger issues in Moses or the deep insecurity in Saul?
And here's the final question to chew on. Would we have rejected David after seeing his incredible list of accomplishments as a warrior and a hero? Or would we, like pretty much every hiring committee in history, have been so blown away by the resume that we completely missed the massive character risks? Now that is a humbling thought.